Which way, Star Rail man? Clear with waifu, needs E6 plus Robin E1, or clear with meta, 2 cost super break. A couple of patches ago, the game's balance seemed fine, but now that the enemy's HP in MOC increased by a whopping 3 million, even I'm starting to feel the heat, and the cycles are starting to catch up to me. Now that a problem has risen, people are hasty to point fingers and blame the devs at Hoyo for increasing the enemy's HP. Which is true, but I believe that it's fundamental character design flaws that led us to this moment. Some YouTubers even blame the players themselves for not pulling for the correct units and building properly. The take we're talking about today is this. To sum it up, he says that if you can't clear late game content, it's entirely the player's fault for not planning their pulls, and that not being able to clear is a skill issue. I do agree that planning your pulls is important. Heck, that's even my main series on this channel. Like, sure, there are some problem players out there, but chalking up the fundamental problems of Star Rail to being the player's fault is far from productive. He also throws out various advice I myself have given, but I think it's about time to dismantle some of them, as these heuristics aren't as effective anymore. Vertical investing is good. You should pull for units that have strong and effective eidolons. However, not all units are equal. Units like Scylla and Kafka even struggle to keep up even when invested. Next up is horizontal investing, which is pulling a couple of teams so that you can make use of the floor buff. This is just straight up not feasible at this point in the game. With the pull income per patch hovering around 100 pulls, it's extremely rough to pump out an E0 S1 character every 2 to 3 patches and have their MOC buff put on the bottom shelf after their flavor of the month has passed. It genuinely does not work. With that said, I think it's time to ditch these nebulous vertical investing and horizontal investing terms and really simplify what this game is really about. Number 1 is pull for a great 3-cost brute force character. Number 2 is pull for Respen or a Death Shred Harmony E1. And of course, pull for a Super Break team. Pulling for an E2 character will typically take a player around 3 patches worth of saving, and if you pulled for someone like Dunhung Imbibitor Lune, he'll last you for an entire year before getting drowned by HP bloat, which did happen. A great example of a good brute force character nowadays is the Herta E2, whose damage increases by a whopping 84% compared to her E0, but will most likely still get drowned in a couple years or so, if they keep up this trend of HP bloat. Secondly, pulling for Robin E1 or Sunday E1 is going to be the absolute best thing you can do for your account. In fact, they are actually the reason behind all of the HP bloat happening in the first place. Today, I'll prove without a shadow of a doubt that the main culprit behind the HP bloat in power creep is actually Cipher, and by that I mean the entire path of the Harmony. Now this might sound crazy to blame an Eon for horrible game balance, but let me explain. We gotta go back to the well here and rewind to 1.0. Quite frankly, MOC back in the day was a cakewalk and pretty much anyone could clear as long as they raced Tingyun, Bronya, and Pela. You could have slapped whatever DPS you can on the stage and perform well. For long-time viewers, you'd know that the majority of the early game I was using Dunhung 4-star to clear. The enemy's weaknesses didn't matter because their HP was simply too low to be remotely challenging. The biggest problem for the early game was just gathering enough resources to level your units and having enough supports to fill up your team slots, since Tingyun and Bronya can only fill up one team. Almost all of the limited DPSs that were released during those patches were strong enough to match the 1.0 cast without needing the best supports available, so much so that you'd start seeing these relicless clears. Because of this, in 1.6 is where we see our first big shift in the game's balance. Coincidentally, this is also the patch that Ruined May released in. At this point in the game, the 12th floor was released, and this is the time when all of the 1.0 release units started to struggle. The previous 10th floor was at 2.3 million HP, and the 12th floor had 3.6 million. This was a gigantic 53% increase in HP, and if you compare it to it today, yeah, it's a lot. The first wave of HP bloat was caused by the release of strong DPSs, and due to this, weaknesses started to matter again. Even though most of the 1.0 DPS casts were too weak to clear, the endgame stage buffs still allowed some gimmick characters to shine, namely Sushang whenever there's a break buff and physical weakness. I'd say this first era of HP bloat honestly wasn't that bad. Even when Acheron released and another blip in the HP pools went up, Almost all the limited DPSs can reasonably clear if the enemy's weaknesses align. Gimmick units like Kafka and Acheron flourished whenever the stage's gimmick buff favored them. Weaknesses mattered, the game's balance is good. But then in 2.2, Robin was released, and another wave of HP bloat came alongside her. Now I can sit here and tell you why Robin's broken, but I feel like that's already self-evident, with almost every single zero cycle clear, or every clear in general actually, as a Robin E1 supporting the main cast. I've already said my piece on Robin multiple times, but there's two main problems with her. First is that she raises almost every team's damage floor, since her buffs are both big and varied enough that she can be slotted everywhere. Her E1, which gives the whole team 24% respawn on ult, is also obscene, and it is one of the main driving factors to why weaknesses don't matter anymore. This is because respawn used to be such a rare stat, the fact that it's another untapped part of the damage formula, and it effectively allows you to ignore weaknesses. Now that it's easily accessible, lots of units can brute force using Robin. Because of this, every team's damage floor is increased, and the MOC HP is now having an arms race to counteract the increase in base power. Second is the fact that her full team action forward has an extremely high ceiling ability, and her ultimate allows numerous setups including Dance 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 and other action forwards that allow for low cycle clears. But can we really blame solely Robin? I'd say most of the fault lies with her E1 when it comes to brute forcing content with crit carries. Her respawn really just allows a lot of invested units to be able to clear without needing to match weaknesses. But speaking of not needing to match weaknesses, we also have to talk about Bootil and Firefly. Both are monstrous units that both have weakness implants and strong baseline kits. Super Break is a monster of a mechanic in of itself, and is deserving of its own video. I'll be releasing it next week, so please press the like button and subscribe so you'll see it when it drops. I do scripted and in-depth analyses of games, so I don't ramble at all like most other Star Rail content creators. At the same time, Firefly and Bootil can also brute force content with Ruin Mace respawn, and they barely even need the conditional floor buffs to function. Are you seeing a pattern here? Because of the HP bloat arms race, you'll either need to be extremely invested in Harmony units like Robin, using units with strong baseline kits like Firefly and Bootil, or you play to the gimmick of the current stage, which means you'll have to pull the new units constantly. Once again, is an impossibility considering the 100 pull per patch F2P income. And it all comes back around to the refutes I've made at the start of the video. Almost every 1.0 DPS is dead in the water at this point. I know that Himiko, Serval, and Herta still have uses in Pure Fiction and Apocalyptic Shadow sometimes, but every time I see them, you always see a Robin or a Sunday with either of their E1s or their S1s attached to them. This footage that you're seeing right now, by the way, is the last time I've ever used Welt in an MOC stage alongside 1.0 units. This was in 1.6 during the first ever HP bloat, and he hasn't recovered since. I barely even cleared the stage, and I maximized the current stage's gimmick just to be able to clear. From the 3 ways to clear MOC, I personally have invested into Sparkle E2, which is roughly equivalent to Robin's E1, and I have a 3-cost Firefly team and Herta E2 to be able to brute force content. Check all 3 off the checklist as an F2P account with horrible luck. I've had people ask me if I think that there's going to be a unit that will power creep Robin, to which my response is that it's not likely they'll even release a character that's as universally powerful. And even if she does get power crept, it won't matter. This is because if there ever is a Robin 2.0, you'd be running both in the same team comp anyway. I also had an epiphany in the last MOC where I was running Feixiao hypercarry and I struggled. Then I swapped back to Qingchui and I cleared it no sweat. This is when I realized your choice of crit DPS rarely matters as long as you have a respawn or a Death Shred Harmony by your side. I know I could have used Motse or March 7th, but the fact still remains that I'd be using Robin E1 alongside her. It's just the illusion of choice at this point. With that said, however, things will shift in 3.0 and here's my current thoughts on what that means for power creep and the shifting of the meta. From what I've seen from the Divination Commission, there's going to be units that are scaling with HP and scaling with other stats like speed. The purpose of this is to shill units and incentivize players to use units like Sunday and Tribbie, while having another summon damage type to add gimmicks to. Much like how they have had specific gimmick buffs to dot, debuffs, follow-ups, and breaks. I also assume they're trying to stifle Robin's power a tiny bit by making it so that her giant 1k attack buffs are wasted on those HP scaling units. But at the end of the day, I still think she's going to be useful regardless. I can't say anything for sure about the exact power level of these units, but it looks like the summons that Remembrance characters have won't be delegated to just damage dealers, but rather healers, buffers, debuffers, and various other utility effects. This is Hoyoverse's way to expand the current design space, and quite honestly, I don't know if it's going to work out for them. There's still a lot of glaring design issues with the game, such as nullities being super niche, which I've already talked extensively about. Reswen being easily accessible means that weaknesses really start to mean nothing again. And I hear that there's going to be a unit that can implant all of the elemental weaknesses at once. At this point, I've just fully given up on having small talks about game design suggestions to Hoyoverse, as I feel like this entirely new summon system and wave of power creep is going to reach the point of no return. I really loved and enjoyed this game when the meta was still diverse, but the devs have really made it clear that you are meant to pull for a Harmony E1 or a meta E2 S1 unit that will slowly depreciate over 6 months and die. I'm honestly considering shifting my content away from Star Rail in around 2 months, and then I'll come back when the Fate collab drops. I personally don't watch any HSR YouTube content, and I've been relying on pure gamer Feelscraft, Instinct, and Fushuan's Divine Foresight to give my insights into the game. I legitimately don't know much about Mr. Poke, and I'm sure he's a nice guy, but one thing really pissed me off, and it's this. A user replied, "You're right, I should have E6 S5 my Jingliu for her to keep up with the current meta." And his response is, if you need E6 S5 any unit to keep them up with the meta, then I don't know what to tell you, skill issue. But like, it's a valid point where some units actually need to be E6 to be able to keep up with the meta. Sure, the S5 part is unnecessary, but the message is still there. Some people want to be able to clear with a unit they personally like. I'm lucky and that I struck out on the fact that Sparkle E2 can carry Silverwolf. But at the same time, others aren't as lucky. I know a lot of people pulled for Kafka, Blade, Jingliu, Sila, and really just the bottom rung of units that are barely worth their salt. I'm here to tell you that it's not your fault, and it's not too late to rise from the ashes. Now I know every Honkai Star Rail content creator has been punching up to Mr. Poke, but I'm here to say, hey, Mr. Poke, if you're watching this, thank you. Thank you for having such an absolutely abhorrent and easily disagreeable take, so that other smaller content creators can get a drop of that sweet watch time ambrosia. I know that you're currently hopping on the rage bait meta, and the trickle-down economics are actually happening. Okay, so I made this video about 2 weeks ago, but I got insanely sick, and my voice evaporated. There's an announcement that there are upcoming retroactive character buffs, which I'm actually pumped for. It seems that Hoyo is acknowledging their mistakes with how they balance their own game. If this doesn't serve as an admission of power creep, then I don't know what is. I also just know that this is gonna perform poorly, so please like and subscribe. It's going to motivate me to upload even though, you know, I'm late to the party. Thank you once again, genuinely. My name is Kyte, thank you for watching. My final message, pull for high value Harmony Eidolons. Super break the world. Zood by. Peace.